Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
How is everyone doing?
Good morning.
It's a beautiful day outside, beginning of winter-ish, but sunny at least, so that's great. So welcome to our public lecture of today. We're going to talk about forgiveness with our friend Marco, but as always, before we do, Chi is going to do the initial reading and prayer for us.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Today the reading is from the book Happy Life by the spirit of Dona de Angelis and psychology of Divaldo Pereira. So the message says, listen calmly whenever you are invited to do so. Let the other person complete his point. Do not jump to certainly incorrect conclusions. Not everyone can express himself quickly or clearly. So listen cheerfully. Ignore misstatements and poor choices of words in order to understand what the other is trying to say. If someone accuses you, search for the root of wrongdoing and get rid of it. Dialogue shall always happen without bitterness, leaving a positive balance. If he clarifies something for you or teaches you something, absorb the lesson. If he is blaming someone, lessen the intensity of the offense with expressions of comfort to the offended party. And with this, I invite you to close our eyes, elevate our thoughts to God, and let us pray. Dear God, thank you again for this opportunity of being gathered here today, this Sunday morning, to reflect more about your teachings, the teachings that you left for us, and that are so valuable for our evolution on this planet. We ask you the blessing of the good spirits of this house for the fulfillment of this task, and also bless our brother Marco who will give us the lecture today. Thanks so much and be with us always, and so be it.
Okay, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Right, so, that was a great reading of it from Happy Life, and I think it's a perfect introduction for what we're going to be talking about today. So when I was preparing for this lecture, I was really inspired to bring a topic that we discuss quite often here at the Spiritist Center. And I think it's very timely appropriate for what's going on in the world today. So we're going to be talking about forgiveness. Now, we all know and we're all aware that there are the world is going through a lot of stressful trials and situations that are making us reflect a lot about who we are as a society, civilization. This is testing our faith and our ability to understand, like, the spiritual world and God and all of that perspective that sometimes is lost, right, in the day-to-day activities, right? So we've been through a pandemic, and we're still going through it, although in a very different way now, right? We're going through wars and multiple of them at the same time, as usually happens in the world. So political movements and discussions about what's true or not, and discussion about inclusion or not, and discussions about so many of these core elements of who we are, right, as individuals and as society. And very often we see that while we're doing that, we have a tendency of not bringing into perspective, like, the other person's opinions and lives and existences. And by doing that, we're also not practicing what we're really talking about today, which is the idea of forgiveness, right? And instead of given us a chance to understand and forgive, we're collectively, I'm not talking about individual examples, but we're collectively being more and more reactive, right? Which is kind of the opposite of forgiveness, right? The idea of immediately take all those emotions, that baggage that we carry, and throw it all back on the table again as soon as we can, as fast as we can, as hard as we can, in a way to say, well, this is the, like this combative approach. Either you agree or you're not my friend anymore, or we can't disagree, or we can't discuss. We can't even have a conversation sometimes with certain individuals. And it happened with me too, so I know exactly what's going on, right? So in that context now, I was really inspired to talk about this, and we're going to be talking about interesting things today, and I'll try to bring as much as possible some examples, right? So we're going to talk what is forgiveness. We'll talk about examples, when to forgive, how to forgive, what to do, and what the consequences are. We'll try to do a little summary, right, of what is this, right? And every time I read or talk about forgiveness, and this is something that touches me a lot because, this is something that I do struggle with. Okay, everybody struggles with. If anyone out there will tell me, like, I forgive all the time right away, I don't even think about it, please talk to me because I need to know how to do that. Like I do. Right? We do have a great example though, right? And this particular spirit said something that we repeat almost, and I'll say exactly the sentence, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And just to test to your ability of memory, because we have very good memories, right? So, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing. Right? You all know who I'm talking about. Right? So we have very good memories. But we have a slight disconnection between having a good memory and transforming that into good actions, right? So that is kind of where we are right now in our evolution, right? So taking that and acting on it, right? That's kind of the step where we are, right? So when Jesus said that, and I mentioned this is the most elevated in the realm of perfection spirit that we've ever had any close contact with, right? So he comes here, and he sees this little kid doing all this little messy things around him, right? Spiritually speaking, right? And then he's saying to our Creator, forgive them because they actually have no clue what are the consequences of their actions. They don't understand it. Like they're doing it, but if they really knew all of this, then they would have a total different perspective of existence, right? They're not there yet. So he's saying that, right? And he's truly blessing us at the same time. So he's being, at least physically at the time, obviously spiritually, he's not at that level anymore. Like he doesn't get feeling what's happening, right? Spiritually. But physically, you're seeing that he's being punished in an incredibly violent way, right? And at the same time, he's not only forgiven us, he's also blessing us at the same time. And he's giving us an example of what to do when this happens to us, all at the same time. So we do have an example for that, but you also have to bring some examples that are probably closer to us, right? So we can relate more, right? But that's another issue, right? The idea of sometimes we think that the problems are so hard and people can do it so different from us that we create this abyss, right, between who we are and what the other person is doing. And then we automatically think that's an unattainable goal in our lives. And then therefore, we ourselves start to defeat, to lose, right? So it's like, I can't do this, right? So that's another problem. And it speaks really well with the context of forgiveness. I'll give you an example. Like, we always bring these incredible examples and say, look at this person, right? They were able to forgive in this incredibly challenging scenario. For some of us, we'll say, wow, that's amazing. But at the same time, we'll say, well, I can't do that. Right? That creates a problem. Because if I take an example right? And I say, wow, that's really beautiful, but not for me. Then I automatically distance myself from the end goal, right? So it's always nice to bring examples that actually speaks a lot closer to us, right? Because we relate more. And we may realize that to get to this stage, it just took a sequence of little steps, right? That we have to go through, right? Because in our daily bread, and this is another passage that I really like, Chico Xavier, in Daily Bread, obviously, he's going to write, you are not only to forgive, that's how it starts. I think this is page 81. You have to understand the offender. So not only forgive, so he's giving a lot of tests now. You have to forgive, understand the offender, and we need to do everything we can to make the other person, in other words, the offender, get up from where he is and get better and improve together with us. It's kind of the same thing that Jesus said, because at the same time he's forgiving, he's always reaching a hand, give an example, and make the offender move, right? Improve. Because the end goal for all of us is for all of us to be perfect, right? So how do we do that, right? So let's get started then. For us to do this, the first thing is to maybe try to understand the concept of forgiveness, right? Because sometimes we have this very interesting idea that forgiving means just forget something. Right? So I don't know, it will never happen, right? That is a problem for our level of understanding, our level of evolution, because if we block something out of our recent memories, we're just saying we forget. We're truly not forgetting, right? Because we haven't been through the entire process of open that whole issue up, understanding what happened, like putting everything into context, truly forgiving the other person, truly moving on from that experience. And then yes, then one day that may basically disappear from our memory completely. But if we just say, I'll forget about it, in most cases, actually not. We're just kind of hiding it in a really nice hidden space somewhere in there that's still there and still has a very significant effect on who we are. Right? So much so that when something like happens again, we very quickly find it back, that thing that we just did right there, put it all back into context and build on it. In other words, makes it worse, more difficult to deal with, right? So this concept of this immediate, forget about it, I don't want to, that's actually not really forgiveness, right? It is a self-protection mechanism that we create. That we hide those things, right? In a very particular space in our alter ego, right? And we kind of shield it from our existence so we can live without having to go through the pain of dealing with it. So just be careful, right? Because that's not true forgiveness. The idea of forgiveness of saying, you know what, yeah, I know this was bad, it happens, but listen, I'm just going to leave my entire existence without away from you and sending all these bad vibes to you, but let's say I forgive you. That's bad for you. Because that's the opposite of forgiveness. You're basically punishing the other individual forever, right? By sending these negative vibrations and putting distances in a way to say that I'll push you the problem as far away as I can without disconnecting from it. So physically you may be far, but you may actually be very close to that problem. And if you don't realize that, then that is not forgiveness. You haven't dealt with that, right? So in the Gospel, Kardec writes something that I find really interesting. So Kardec in chapter 10, I think, yeah. So Kardec's going to say, and I have a little sentence here to remind me. He's going to say, there is another kind of charity. So he's talking about charity, right? Love in action, right? That is much more burdensome and consequently more meritorious. Forgiving those whom God has placed in our path as instruments to our challenges, to our patience, as our tests, right? So we can improve ourselves. So what Kardec gets in that moment really well, and we still don't, is that in the overwhelming majority of cases that things are happening that are really not great, right? Things are happening, there's a test, there's a challenge that we have to deal with. It may be a person or a scenario or a part of society or a company or a relationship, any scenario. Those things are not happening by chance. Right? So Kardec is very clear about that. And when that is happening, there is a different level of charity. We talk about charity all the time, right? This is like a core of Spiritism. But forgiveness is a type of charity. But as Kardec pointed, is actually one that is actually more burdensome, more challenging than any other charity we typically think about, right? And what he's trying to say is that when you see someone in pain, suffering, right? When you see someone, for example, we had a family in my work environment that they were Ukrainians, and their family still in Ukraine at the time when the war started, and their house was bombarded. Some of their family members actually were sent to the war. They were here. They were trying to bring the family over. They were hiding in basements and moving around all the time. So when I'm hearing that story, I can connect to it and say, well, this is a challenging time. I extend my hand, right? This is something that we've learned, right? Most of us will have that immediate empathy. Yeah, not all of us on earth, but maybe most of us at the start, right? We have that immediate empathy and support and charity, right? So that's one type of charity. But let's say it was the same scenario of someone who is also going through a hard time, but somehow that person was actually part of the perpetrator side, not the one that is facing the consequences of the war. In other words, the invader or whoever is actually causing the pain, right? I would I'll say for 100% that I would not have the same type of empathy to any type of challenge in any way, because I would judge it before, even my heart connects to it, I would be judging it already, right? That is a natural response. So what Kardec is saying here, it's a lot harder to practice charity with someone that is attacking you or acting in a way that you don't like, or causing you some trouble, or judging your work and all that. But the reality is, those are typically the spirits that need more help spiritually. And that is the kind of crazy thing that we have to understand in Spiritism, is that what we see not necessarily means the entire spiritual existence of that scenario. Right? That is why Kardec is so specific and like sharp about this, that this is a lot harder than any other type of characters we have. Right? But Kardec is now understanding, obviously, from a very, very broad spiritual perspective, that one, nothing happens by chance. Two, most spirits that are actually causing the trouble are the ones that need most help, right, to get out of there and to improve, right? And it is important for us, right, to know that it doesn't need to. He's not saying that you got to be best buddies with the guy that is bullying you. No, he's not saying that. There's another issue. But we cannot be doing the exact same counter to, like, a reactive mode of aggressiveness towards another person, right? Just because the other person is being aggressive to us. It's a basic concept we teach our kids all the time, right? But as an adult, we have a hard time understanding that, right? So that's what he's saying. So it's much more meritorious for you to forgive and to help someone who is not, who may be seen by us as, someone that is not being something positive or being aggressive or being judgmental or being, bullying or something like that. Right? But they typically are the ones that need more help. And this is not, I'm totally digressing, going tangentially now, but I think this is a great example. And I do that all the time. It's probably, so I can see Raquel looking at me already. I was having an experience with my oldest son in school. And he was complaining about a particular individual in school who was constantly aggressive and calling him names and, doing things specifically to see him crying and all of this. And I'm going through this like, Daniel, and then I remember saying that there's a good chance that this person needs a lot more help than what you think. I know that's how the person is manifesting their problems, they're targeting you. But if you understand that, you can protect yourself from that energy because it's really not targeted to you. This is most likely an individual that is doing that as a cry for help. 2 weeks later, he comes to me, Daddy, I have to tell you something. It's like, what? That person was crying today, right? I'm like, yeah, Daddy, she needs help. I'm like, wow, what happened? Yeah, she has a hard time understanding when things go against her, when there's a no. And and then she starts it, it's like, wow, okay. So I'm getting this. And then he's like, Daddy, I think you're right. I think I actually need to help him. And I'm like, yes, that sounds good, right? Yeah. So just to see that even kids can detect that and understand it, right? But as an adult, sometimes we have a tough time with it. Right? So Kardec continues, and I'm going to read now from the Gospel according to Spiritus. Life is difficult, I know. It is composed of 1,000 nothings, pay attention, which are pinpricks that end up hurting us. Right? So again, put that in perspective, right? That's exactly what we're going through, right? We're going through this 1,000 of nothings that we tend to hyper-focus on and amplify in our minds, struggle with, and then collectively they hurt us a lot. Right? And we get stuck on it. Right? We must consider that duties imposed on us, the consolations, the compensations we receive in return, and then we'll see that the blessings are more numerous than the sorrows, by a lot. The burden seems less heavy when we look to heaven than with our brow is bent towards the ground. So in other words, look with the understanding, right? That if we understand that God is perfect, we know for sure that everything is happening for a reason. And there's always a different way of going through any of those challenges. And that's up to us to kind of, in any scenario, to think about it, right? So he continues, courage, my friends. Christ is our model. He suffered more than any of you and had nothing for which to reproach himself. Whereas you have your past to expiate and to strengthen your future. Right? That's from the Gospel according to Spiritus. So one of the examples, every time I think about forgiveness, I like to think about Stephen, right? The story of Paul and Stephen. And I like to think about him particularly because every time I think about that story, I can see each one of the small actions that he took collectively to the point when he came back to help Paul at the time. And I can see myself failing in every one of them. Everyone. Because the book is written in a way that if you look carefully, there's a, if you read this book again, and I highly recommend, if you haven't read it, please read it. If you read it once, please read it again. Because I'm going to tell you this, and you'll notice. There is a crescendo type pattern of what he's doing, and what he's doing, and what his challenges are, and how he's succeeding and being successful in every single one of those challenges progressively. So, for example, he lives in Corinth, like with his family in Corinth at the time, 34 before Jesus. And this is a city that's been taken over and run by, right, the Julius, right, Julius Caesar. And you can imagine that although they did allow certain liberties in religion and function of their society, they also have very strict rules on, how to collect money, how to do certain things like political, right? So they're hyper controlled, right? Obviously by the Roman Empire. And Licinio Minutio is he's the proconsul, right? So basically he is the manager representing Julius Caesar at that time. Right? And he's obviously very interested in controlling and getting some money, right? Power, right? So he's a classic like dictatorial personality, right? That accumulates a lot of power. And while doing that, he's obviously forcing some families that lived on agriculture, for example, which is Jeziel's family, which is Stephen, right? And Jochebed and Abigail, his sister, to overwork, pay more taxes, and have less liberties, right? You can see that pattern. This is not new, right? This still happens today, right? In many societies, civilizations, and in other countries, they're dominated by certain other countries, right? There's always the same pattern. There's some type of administration that's put in place, less and less freedoms, less and less power, more and more charges and restrictions until there starts some revolts, right? Some issues starts to arise in those societies. And that happened at that time too. But even at that time, Jeziel, which is Stephen, he's already telling his dad, which is also Jewish, but not as religious, and his sister, saying, you know what? We got to keep faith. We got to go through this. We got to work harder. He's the type of person that there's a fire in the house. He's going to be saying, well, it's okay. We're going to get the water. We're going to put it out. Everything's going to be fine. While everyone is running around like crazy, not knowing exactly like what's going on, right? So in the minimal things, he's already showing that, well, I'm mature enough spiritually that I can deal with this. Right? And then Jochebed, his dad, was the opposite, right? He's reactive, right? So he would be complaining about things, he'll be trying to take action against things that he thought were not right. And then he went up to Mr. Minutio to complain, well, formal complaint, right, about what was happening. And you guys can figure out immediately that did not went well, right? You can't complain to a dictator. The dictator will most likely punish you or kill you. There's two options, right? They'll never take your side and say, well, absolutely, oh my God, yeah, we're doing so, I'm gonna change. No, that's not gonna happen, right? So what they did, basically, they lost their lands, like a good chunk of it, right? Because of that complaint. And Jochebed again got reactive again, like many of us are, right? So, now I'm upset, because now I was upset before. Now I'm super upset. And people, when they're super upset, they lose some of their emotional regulation and their control. Does that happen to us?
No.
Yeah. I know it happens to us. No, it's like, yeah, Denise is saying like, no, it never happens. Like, forget. It's like, it happens to us since we're like babies and adulthood and all of that, right? So it does, right? So losing his emotional control and emotional regulation, he freaks out toward Trentum and puts fire on Minutio's lands, right? Intentionally. Obviously, it didn't go really well because one, he killed one of his servants, and people saw that he did it, right? So he thought he was fine. He like put it on fire, this big land, and then he goes home and like, everything's fine. Just to realize they came knocking his door and say, well, I think you're in trouble because we saw it, someone died, and now like you too, right? So they get him arrested. And then you're probably asking like, what's Jeziel doing all this time? If you read the book, don't answer. But what do you think he was doing? He was actually putting the fire out. He's walking home. he sees Licinius Minucius land on fire, instead of saying, well, this is Licinius, like he's a bad guy, I'm not, he actually goes in there with the servants from Licinius and actually help them put out the fire without even knowing that his dad caused it. So when he gets home all scorched and, like in trouble, then he realizes that, his father was the one that's at fault for that. And then you say, oh, he got really mad and upset. He said, Dad, that's okay. We're going to go through this with faith, no matter what happens. And I forgive you for all of that. He realized that, one, he lost his land, his family was apart. He can see all this destruction happening, right? And again, instead of just like exploding like his dad did, he uses his faith to bring some peace and unity and forgiveness to his own family and to his sister, who was also obviously in a lot of trouble, right? So the rest of the story, just this part of the story, basically, obviously, his dad is going to be punished, right? You know what happens when something that bad happens, but he himself, Jeziel, was actually sent for forced works, like some type of slavery, right? On the boat to a distant site. His sister is also punished. So all of them, they lose everything, they lose their lands, and their family is done, basically, right? From our perspective, right? And then you think, well, now Jeziel, he got into this Avengers, like Iron Man suit, right? Yeah, because that's what we like nowadays, right? There's an Avenger, right? So someone's going to avenge something that the other person did, kind of thing. Or he'll put on his kind of Rambo kind of bandana. It's like, now I'm going to go back and I'm going to kill everyone and make everyone. No, he goes into this boat as a slave, and I don't think we can even picture the idea of going to a wooden boat 2,000 years ago that has no accommodations, like no beds. This is not a cruise ship. Right? They had to do all their physiological necessities inside the ship, right? While rowing, right? Because they couldn't stop, just like, right? So not a very pleasant scenario, right? But something interesting happened. Sergio Paulo was the person who was actually the most important personality in that particular boat. So he was the one that was leading this, this group of both the slaves and the workers in the boat. Sergio Paulo gets the plague, right? Which at that time is obviously a life sentence, right? And no one wants to get close to him, right? So if you have the plague, you're basically suffering until you die. Guess what happened to Jeziel? So everybody in the ship is saying, oh, that guy's gonna die, lock him up in a room and forget about it. What happens to Jeziel? He said, I'll take care of him. He raised his hand. He's now working as a slave for something he didn't do, right? And he's the one that raised his hand and said, I'm going to take care of him, and he does. So he's the only one that goes into the room and take care of the wounds of Sergio Paulo throughout the journey. Right? So you see, I've already failed in his first 4 trials in several months. Right? I would have done exactly the opposite in every single. So Sergio Paulo survives. And he gets the plague, and he also survives, right? And we're going to learn about that because forgiveness actually increases your health. That's something we're going to talk about, right? We'll run out of time. So he's, for his actions now, see the consequences, direct consequences. He's released. Not in a nice way. He's basically said, if you jump right here, it's close enough that you can swim and you're going to be missing, right? He's not released because, you're so kind, you're going to be free. No. He's basically giving one chance in like 1 to 100 to survive swimming with the plague without food or water supplies or anything to a beach that's deserted in Joppe, right? And say, you know what, if you can just swim out, I'm not going to tell anyone, right? He says, okay, I'll take it. So he jumps off the boat and swims to the beach. where he finds this incredible individual called Ireneo Cortona, right? That immediately seeing him takes him to the house of life, right? And then we know that he meets Peter, he meets Andrew, he learns the gospel, and he reconnects to that because he already knew it, right? Spiritually speaking. Okay. Now, just to kind of make the story short now, so he eventually, through the gospel, right? He is very good at understanding and also teaching the gospel, right? He will cross paths with Saul, right? Which was the exact opposite. Like he's coming from a very traditional Jewish organization at the time, right? He was like a leader, right, into the temple, and very well known for his impassioned speeches about maintaining tradition, right, in Judaism. So he's automatically against the Galileans that supported Jesus, right? Because for him, how could an envy, someone that is like a prophet, be a carpenter working out of nowhere with Galileans, right? And suffering and telling people that's okay, right? For all that to happen, right? So for them, this is like outrageous, right? So obviously he's very against it. He crossed paths with Stephen now, because Stephen changes his, Giselle changed his name to Stephen. And he is absolutely impressed by Stephen, because Stephen could basically counter every single argument that Saul could ever have imagined and created, right? But that didn't end well with Stephen, because he asked him, gets permission to kill him, right? Stephen gets arrested, right? Is taken to an open square in the city and stoned to death, right? So soon after that, when Stephen is about to die, what does he do? Does he get upset, angry, go ready for a fight? No. He forgives again the guy that is right there throwing the first stone. Right? And with this interesting turn of things, the events, and we know that what happens after that, because Saul is going to be very conflicted, because he discovers that Abigail is actually the sister of Stephen that he just killed, right? And then Abigail forgives him too for killing her brother, which he cannot understand, right? How can you do that? And he meets Abigail dying in the bed because she's very sick. And what does she do? She actually thank him for being with her, like they had a relationship, right, for so long. And she blessed him, forgive him, and then he totally blew. It's like, I can't understand. How can you believe in something like this so much that your faith forgives me, which he knew at the time he was not going to do things, right? Now, but see, Stephen is not done in the story. I've already failed the last 6 things that the book tells about Stephen. Now I'm gonna also fail the 7th, right? Because when everything is completely disastrous, Saul now walking to Damascus have this incredible connection with Jesus, right? So he sees the light, blinded by it. We know the story, right? So he changes to Paul now, right? Because it's a new person, has a new connection, a new story, new life. He takes on Ananias, which used to be like one of the master's mentors of Abigail and Josiel, Christian, right? As his mentor, he exiles 3 years in the desert, and when he's back into Damascus, who comes to support him as his spiritual mentor? Stephen, again, right? So Josiel, for I don't know how many times in the story, forgives and put that into action. In other words, he's now not only forgiving, he's actually helping the guy that stoned him to death, killed, helped, contributed to the death of his sister and all of that, right? So, anyways, so if you want to take the example of Stephen, I think there's a clear progression of he showing how elevated spiritually, morally he is, right? And how in every scenario he will always stop, reflect, and kind of take the high road and be, doing what Jesus asked him to do, You know, in none of those steps, I said, this is easy, right? Because it's not. It's a work in progress. We all have to do it every day, many times a day, actually, right? But how do we do that? Okay, so let's be more practical now. And a lot of the things that I'm probably going to say, you're going to find in books that are talking about cognitive behavior therapy and dialectical behavior therapy, because when you have kids, you start to learn a lot about how to control emotions and take actions and do certain things with kids. And the more I read about how to teach kids to control their big emotions, which is interesting, I realize that I think we should all learn that too. So while I'm learning this to teach my kids, believe it or not, I think I'm learning for myself too. And I can tell you, I think I need more of that. So the first step in a scenario like that is to, there's this interesting acronym called STOP, right? Which is stop, take a step back, observe, and proceed with caution, right? That makes a lot of sense. Even when you're driving, it works. So why is that important? To avoid that immediate reactivity that we have, this impulsivity that we use in more therapy diagnostics, right? So, we have this incredible tendency of replying to that email 10 seconds after. We shouldn't do that, right? We should sleep on it. This is something I teach my students all the time. If you got this nasty email, do not reply to it, because you're going to be embedded with that same energy that came with it. And it's never going to be good. No matter what you write, even if you put the right word on it, it's going to sound horrible, because the words in the email is going to come embedded with your own emotions on it. And then we say, oh, it's an email. You connect. Why not? Our brains are connected at that time. Spiritism teaches that, but we forget about it, right? When you're angry, right? It's like, I'm angry. But yeah, we're sending that vibration. We have established a mental current. We're connecting to the person that sent the email. That's why you can read an email now and you can read an email the next day, and it's a completely different email. Why? The words are the same. You are not. We're not. Right? So that's why the stop algorithm works perfectly, to take you off that impulsivity, reactivity, that never going to get you anywhere. I can guarantee you that. It's only going to get you into trouble, right? Because at the time that you stop, you take a step back, and this is like obviously not, you don't need to actually physically walk back, but taking a step back in the scenario means that you're going to have to take a little bit of another person's perspective, right? Take time to understand what's happening. Because unfortunately for us, or maybe fortunately, I think that, but our brains have a very instinctive way to respond to things fast, right? Without going through our proper front cortex control. So in other words, we respond like, wow, you get an energy, we're back right away. Someone tries to punch you back because you're not thinking, just like a flight response, right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so you just do it, right? But with the frontal cortex, always that's where you process emotions a lot more appropriately, right? And emotional control is there, right? But that takes time, right? And kids take a lot of time because they're developing that. In adults, should take less, maybe, but sometimes not. But allows us to actually process what's happening and maybe take the other person's perspective, which we don't sometimes, right? And that's the idea of observing it is the same. So when you're receiving something that's either be personal or directly via someone's telling you something, or someone is writing you something, or you heard like whatever through TV or something like that, because that happens on the TV too, right? We're connected to this breaking news 24-hour mode, right? It's like breaking news. Like, it's interesting because some channels actually have breaking news like standard now underneath it. There's always a breaking news. It's always like something's about to happen. Is it going to explode? That tendency of creating this chaos, right, in the universe, which is interesting because it connects really well to our, to how we see things sometimes, right? But So observing means we have time to go through that, right? And understand what's really the big issue in place, what is my contribution to it? Because if you don't look in yourself, you're not gonna be able to fix anything, right? And then you proceed with caution, right? And that's when you reply to things maybe later, maybe another time. Take your time, it's okay, right? So the next thing then, so the first is the stop algorithm, right, that I like. The next one is like, it's okay to be upset. And we tell this to kids, I tell my kids every day. Like, Daniel, it's okay, I know you're sad. Well, you can be sad, right? You can't tell someone, oh, you don't want to be sad. Stop being so upset. No, like, well, it doesn't work. You're making them more upset, right? Because we have to understand our emotions, we have to deal with them, we have to go through them, grow with them, understand, recognize how we feel. That's totally fine. That's a normal process regulation, right? Being afraid keeps us alive. Like, stop being so afraid. Like, why? That's why we're here. Because if we're not afraid, all of us would die by age 5, like jumping off cliffs. Because we're not afraid of it. Like, we just be actually able to do anything. Right? There's a very short lifespan for someone who's not afraid. Right? But see, taking those big emotions and putting them into context, right, and understanding how I feel first, and then how I'm going to manage that, right? So because you can be upset and don't flip the dish, right? That's what we do. So being upset does not mean being rude to other people, right? I can be upset about something and still have a normal day, right? Being upset about something that happened and construct on it and say, okay, I'm upset, so I know why, so let me deal with it. It's fine, right? As adults, we should do that, right? And really use that moment to filter out what you feel and don't project into other person what you use with, right? So that's a great example. For example, typically when these big emotions come, right? It could be anger, it could be, when you're upset, when whatever is really, really burning inside of you is about to explode, right? It's about to flicker lit, right? It is important for us, right, at that moment, to maybe look inside ourselves and say, what is connecting inside of us that is allowing that to grow so out of control, right? Because usually the answer is actually inside of us, not the other person. But we do project on the other person the fault of it. It's like, oh, that person's doing that, right? Again, that's part of that reactivity that we have, right? And in the vast majority of cases, if it's really connecting to us, it's actually us, right, that we have to deal with. Because if someone is really, really upset with me, and I'm totally in peace with what I've done, there's very little chances that I'm going to take that same level of energy and I'm going to show that to. It's like, yeah, that guy's upset, it's fine, they'll deal with that. But if I get really upset, oh, they got upset, I'm really upset, then you're connecting. So if you're connecting, then there's something inside of you that's allowing that to connect. And it's up to us to figure that out. Right? So that's the second one. So looking at those big emotions. So the third one now, that's when it starts to get more complicated, because that's when actions come in, right? So now I was able to stop. I was able to look into my big emotions, right, of something that happened. Now it's time for me to repair and then forgive. Right? Forgive's coming. There you go. Right? So obviously there are many examples of this, but Chico gives us a great example, right? And I think we probably heard this story many, many times. But, when his neighbor, killed his dog, right? So his neighbor, the dog was sick, it was being a hard time for Chico, and Chico was taking care of the dog, it's all this story. And the neighbor is like, in a way of saying, to help in her perspective, right? She said, I'm gonna take this problem from your life. You already had too many problems with Chico, right? And she ends up killing his dog, right? So Chico, he talks about this, and I find it really cool because he's talking to a man. It's like, it's like I'm really upset about this, right? Because we have a tendency to think that Like, does Shiko get upset? Of course he was upset. See, those are big emotions. All of us are upset at some point. That's not a problem, right? It's not that he's not involved. No, it's fine. So he was upset. And he caught himself projecting that same negativity back to the person who did it, creating this current of negativity between them, right? Even though they were not physically close, Emmanuel could see it, right? That connection. And then he realizes that he's now trying to take action, and then he's asking what should I do, right? Because now it's affecting him, affecting his ability to do his work, right? And then Emmanuel very, 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 wisely said, find something that's going to make her really, really happy, something that she really wants. But why is Emmanuel saying that? Because Emmanuel knows the only way to break that current that's not connecting them is to switch it to something that is on the positive side, right? And it has to come from both sides, right? So you can mitigate that, right? So obviously he figured out what she wanted, like a sewing machine, right? And then he works for it. He gets the money. He buys it to her. And when he delivers that to her, Emmanuel describes immediately he could see that current of negativity, of imbalanced energies disappear in air, right? Do we have to buy sewing machines to everyone? No. Actually, we don't have to buy anything to anyone. But this is one example of something that really, really made him struggle, right? And we all struggle, right, at some point with certain things, right? Now, does it mean that, every time that something happens, I say, I got to find what this person really likes, and then, no, this is not the point. But the point is understanding that the process of repair requires action, right? Not saying it or put it on the shelf, put it on the drawer, hide it away. That does not fix the problem, right? So I think the example from Emmanuel and Shiko is really good because it shows them that they actually have to physically do something, right, to make that happen, right, that forgiveness to occur completely, right? Now, for us, then, what should we do? I understand that we're not gonna get out of here today, and then the next thing that happens, I'm gonna pull that out of my memory and say, wow, look, I'm gonna do all these amazing things. It's not gonna happen. Fine. Don't create goals that you can't achieve because that's the easiest way for you to go downhill, right? But we can do a few things. And I'll tell you one thing. If you use the STOP algorithm, control your emotions, and maybe send some good vibes back, even if it's your mental currents. If you're able to switch your mental currents just a tiny bit, so that the thoughts that you're sending back to that person that did anything against you, they're not negative anymore. That is a huge start. How about we try that? How about we try praying for the person? But not praying, like sometimes you say, pray for the people who pray. Oh God, help them because they're so horrible. That's like the opposite of, this is not praying. It's just like you're punishing them somehow using God in the middle. Like God, throw a stone at them because, this is not helpful, right? So even praying for someone requires you to be in a good mental state. Because otherwise the prayer, we know that the power of prayer is directly proportional to that. Right? So if I'm praying right now and I'm praying completely disconnected, my mind is buzzing around a lot of things, it doesn't really reach that, that high. Right? We're also gonna get some help, but maybe not exactly what we're looking for. All right. So change your mental currents, your thought process about what happened, right? That's why it is a process, right? You can't immediately next time say, I'm gonna forgive it, it's all good. So if you find that person, I wanna know because I don't know how that's possible. You have to be such an evolved mental, spiritual, moral perspective to immediately go through all of this without even thinking about it, oh, Jeziel did it, right? In those little steps. But, I'm sure Jeziel as a spirit has a history that is quite comprehensive about doing what we're talking about today, right? And then after we're able to do that, the repair part, which could be through some actions, thoughts, prayers, whatever that is, has to occur somehow. And every scenario is different, every case is different. We don't have to buy things to everyone that did something to us. But I think in our part, if we have peace, if we're able to think positively about the most challenging things we've been through, that is really what God wants from us. Right? That's the start. And then maybe another life, maybe another day, maybe another scenario. We'll be able to completely close that loop, right? If we can't do it right now. And then eventually we'll reach true forgiveness. But it's not as, maybe it's not that easy to do, let's say that way, or fast, right? But, there is a process in place for that, right? And, I had some other examples, but, kind of running out of time. But we'll come back to this topic another time. But I can end with a small passage from Living Spring that Chico Xavier, obviously Matthew is going to write, forgive always, right? So the idea is that if you forgive other people's offenses, your Heavenly Father will forgive yours, right? This is like another basic concept, right, that we have. In Living Spring, we're gonna read this. No matter how serious a neighbor's wrongs may seem to be, do not waste your time on criticism. The idea now, going back to the wars and all this, like, the whole idea that we automatically judge and criticize, right? And start to contribute to the problem by sending this very negative darts of energy, right, against everyone, right? We get into the mode being reactive. Maybe not by what we're saying, but our thoughts are there, connected, right? And our heart's connected to it. So I think what Chico and Emmanuel are saying here in this is that, particularly in the moment that this word going through these convulsions, it is up to us to filter through how we're feeling about this. Even if we can't physically go there and help every person that is in need, but let's at least send some positive thoughts to the whole world. I think that's what Emmanuel is really getting to, and I think it cannot be more timely and appropriate to what we're going through. Yeah. Okay. So let's start with that. Okay. So thank you all for have some questions, I guess.
Thank you, Marco. Do we have any questions or comments?
It's when you start talking about forgiveness,
Yeah.
I immediately thought about travesty.
Yeah.
I love the book. Great book, please read.
Yeah.
Everybody gonna love it.
Yeah.
But the perspective that I started thinking was Paul.
Yeah.
Right? So think about Paul. Paul did a lot of bad things, if I may. How he could forgive himself after he did all that. Right?
Yeah.
That's the first point. The second is like, if probably being close to Paul or seeing Paul there, I would judge immediately.
Oh,
right?
sure. Yeah, that's crazy. Right?
It's like, but then if you see, I would judge Saul.
Yeah.
But I would love Paul.
Yeah,
so how
sure.
he's the same person?
Yeah.
But and me is the same person either.
Yeah.
Judging and I'm not sure if I would forget.
Yes.
And forgive.
Yeah.
So it's like it's a very difficult challenge.
Yeah, it's a great example because if you see Paul, he never forgets, right? So he's really works through.
Yeah.
Right? It's just like he takes 3 years in the desert to think about it, he has his connections and all that. He's judged, everybody, he was not even accepted back in Jerusalem when he came back, right? People, they wanted distance from him.
Mm-hmm.
They actually threatened to treat him just like any other Christian, right? He was persecuted, he was imprisoned. So he was reminded on a daily basis of actually what he did by actually going through it.
Yeah.
So that was his process. The way I see it is I absolutely agree with you that was his process of of using that past, right, to change, to give him the energy to see, okay, this is how I let the other person, like that's how I make them feel, this is how I feel now. And he excels at drawing from that and kind of moving forward in the other direction as Paul, right? But, I think if you think about how he did, I think it's quite the opposite. I think he has vivid memories, right? In the book, you can see of what he's done, right? But he takes that and reprocess it, right? To make it a positive thing, right? And I think that's exactly what we're referring to, and it's the hardest thing to do. Because if you just say, oh, forget about my past, I'm not that person anymore, right? No, he's still that person, but he was able to take all of that, right, process through it, and say, okay, this is how I should be, right? And this is a great event.
And the second part was, I don't want to go too much into
Yeah.
complex or anything like that, but Judas,
Yeah.
it's like the way that he reacted was exactly different
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
than Saul and Paul.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And he's still judged today, right?
Yeah.
As a spirit, he's probably feeling all those mental darts of, he's like in a perfect world realm right now, like a perfect spirit realm probably, right? And we're still judging him. Like he was the same guy that, I'm saying, like this is to show how we get stuck into this thing, right? And then he was reactive, right? He wanted to get things done quickly and get, like, wow, let's fight, let's whatever. And then obviously, he learned from that, right? There's good examples of how he is evolved right now as a spirit. As a spirit, he is evolved now. But, and we're still judging him, right, to this day. Over.
Eat. Yeah,
Okay.
but it is interesting, right? It's the whole process of the evolution, how we learn from it, grow, and move forward. And that's exactly what Saul Paul did.
Yeah.
Sorry, you had something?
What is the B again that stop?
B?
That you say stop is.
Oh, proceed with caution.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. No, I like that. I have to
Yeah.
talk
So
about
stop,
that.
take a step back, observe, and proceed with caution.
I have a 5-year-old this week. She was telling me she was plotting revenge for a kid in school.
Oh my
At least they're honest, right?
Yeah.
There you go.
Because we're doing the same thing, we're not saying it, right? We're mentally doing it, right? That's, at least kids are,
It's worse.
It's a filter
Yeah.
mentality, right?
All right, well, thank you, Marco,
Yeah.
very much for the great lecture. A lot to think about and see how we can do better ourselves. Thank you for those who joined us online. Hope to see you next Sunday. For you guys, we are gonna get ready for our passes.
Just,